Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a Whisky Exchange Thursday tasting. And so this evening, we're moving away from our whiskey of previous weeks, and we're looking at the wonderful world of gin. I'm joined by four folks from three different distilleries from across the UK who make some incredible gins. But this week, we're not necessarily just focusing on the classic styles of gin that you may be used to. We're also going to be looking into the wonders of flavoured gins, which is a sort of different style of gin, which is really sort of pushing forward at the moment, becoming very, very popular. So first things first, I'd like to say hello to Jared Brown and Sanford Brown from, or just unmute you, hit the little buttons, from Sipsmith down here in London. So hello, Jared. Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Hi.
Wonderful to be here with everybody.
Likewise.
Cool, good to see it. And also we are joined by Chris from Hayman's, also down here in London.
Hello, thanks so much for having us.
Excellent, good to see you. And we also have James Chase from Chase Distillery. And, oh, there we go, and there he is.
Hi, everybody.
So, brilliant. So, as I say, we've got these 6 gins we want to have a bit of a taste through. So, we're going to start off with the Sipsmith Classic Gin. And if I can hand over to you, Jared, to kick us off and tell us all about your lovely gin.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the introduction. I'm Jared Brown, one of the founders and the master distiller of Sipsmith Gin. Let's get straight into getting some gin into a glass. So go ahead and open up that container. Those little metal tabs might be a wrestle, but so I'll give you a moment. And then, does everybody have a glass of water? Because before we taste the gin, I highly recommend having a sip of water, chew that around, rinse your palate, because your palate, before you do that, has everything that's built up from you breathing in and out since you last had a sip of anything. And that will actually taint the first taste of liquid that you have. Now your palate should be very clean. And what we're tasting here is a benchmark London Dry. When Sam Fairfax and I first sat down back in 2007 together and started talking about this, we looked for a benchmark gin to work from, a true London Dry, as it used to be made, as it should be made. One shot on a copper pot. And we couldn't find that gin. There are loads of great gins out there, but that one from which all modern gins evolved had disappeared. I reached back between 1850 and 1870. 1850, because that was when the pure neutral spirit had suddenly become ubiquitous. Charles Jerome had patented a column still in 1818, Anais coffee in 1831, but that didn't mean those spirits were around. Pure English wheat spirit didn't come up till later. Musprat's chemistry from 1850, a dozen different gin styles. The one that caught me in there was London or dry gin. Fast forward a few years, that's what everyone was drinking because it was so much better. Let's get into the nose here. And if you wear glasses, this is actually the time to take them off, because glasses ever so slightly pinch on the sinuses. They reduce your olfactory acuity. Also, breathing only through your nose, holding the glass up only to your nose, as you've all just done, mouth open. With mouth open, now the aromas reach both the orthonasal receptors and the retronasal palate. It's like listening to music with 2 earbuds instead of just one. It's one of the secrets of the world's professional tasters. So with all that in mind, we bring it up, we nose, soft pine, sweet citrus. This is the juniper coming up to greet. Now, London Dry Gin, by definition, the predominant flavor must be juniper. That's like saying Chardonnay, the predominant flavor must be grapes. How about Chardonnay grapes? How about juniper from the North Mediterranean? The Juniperus communis grows subarctic to subtropic all the way around the Northern Hemisphere, but only on the North Mediterranean do you have the terroir that produces this flavor. So after that fresh, sweet citrus that's backed up by Seville orange and lemon peel, you get a bit of floral. This is the orris root coming up. And beyond that, earthy notes and a bit of spice. Now we're getting into the angelica, which is like the chartreuse of botanicals, with deep, earthy, herbaceous, sweet, fiery notes. Years ago, I heard people saying, oh, it's flavorless. It just binds the other botanicals together. The 75 angelica plants in my garden beg to differ on that. They've got a lot of wonderful flavor to them. After that, warm spice, cinnamon, cassia, close cousins, but needed both. In the finish, that lemongrass and pepper come up. That's the Russian coriander. On the palate, the first thing you'll notice, warming, but it doesn't burn. Good spirits warm, bad spirits burn. No amount of filtration can clean up a broad heart cut. This is a narrow heart cut to create that smooth warmth. Tasting full strength, room temperature, mind you, and just warming, but also creamy. That's where the almond comes into this. So that creaminess underneath, and then from there, exactly as I described, of that soft, sweet citrus in the fore, leading through the other botanicals. When we distill this, I'll never forget the day that we set the heart cut. Fairfax was in the distillery, had all these formula books laid out, the tables on how to set a heart cut based on the volume off the still, the temperature on the still, the ABV of the liquid coming over, the volume, how much liquid had come over, etc. I closed all the books. I walked him over to the still. We stood there talking for a bit, and then I shot my hand up and I threw the lever. He said, what? I said, the heart cut just started. How do you know? Smell. Smell. The citrus comes over first. And then the afternoon, I was sitting there working away, jumped up, threw the lever back. And he said, why now? And I said, think of the tasting notes on vintage champagne, biscuity, toasty, creamy, almondy. Yeah, wait for it. In another moment, stewed, vegetal, here comes the tails. And after 3 weeks, he said, I can do it now. And I kind of looked at him, he said, because I timed you, and without looking at your watch, you did it within 30 seconds every time. Now we know where the cut is. At Sipsmith, we now work off of the times that he calculated from that, but each distiller will still go over and smell to confirm, because better than any book, the still will tell you when the heart begins and finishes. And so this is a gin that should be instantly recognizable and appreciated by a distiller from the mid-1800s. That was the goal. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you very much. So starting from a modern distiller who is looking back towards the 1800s to another distiller who has sort of history going back a long way as well. So Chris, do you want to tell us all about the wonders of Haman's?
Sure thing. Thank you for that, Jared. That was lovely. Very poetic. As you mentioned, a distiller from the 1800s would be able to recognise the gin that you've produced today, which is very much what the gin that we produce essentially is. So Haman's gin, the London Dry that I believe you're tasting, this one here.
Yep, it's the Haman's London Dry is in our little bottles today.
Perfect. If you'll crack one of those open, and again, if you got your glasses, take them off, give it a whiff. Good top tip. So the thing with Hayman's, I'm currently here in the distillery. This isn't a virtual background. I'm actually here at the distillery where we distill. We've got our lab there where we do our innovation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But this is the sixth home of Hayman's Gin. The best thing I find about Hayman's and working with the family is that it's a family-owned distillery, and it's the longest surviving family-owned distillery. So James Hayman, he's the fifth generation. His father, Christopher Hayman, has been distilling in the industry now for 51 years. And it all started with his great-great-grandfather, also called James, back in 1863. And again, as Jared sort of alluded to, this was sort of that golden period for gin, when it was very much a focus on producing consistent London dry or consistent gin, essentially. And that's what we've tried to do. We consider ourselves sort of bastions of traditional gin. We very much look to preserve what gin is and keep gin as it should be going forward. And that's very much hopefully what you can get from our London dry. It's similar to the Sipsmiths, as you said there. I'd consider it very much the textbook for what gin should be. If aliens came down, or if someone came from the future and looked back and said, what is gin? Grab a bottle of London dry, grab a bottle of Hayman's London dry, and it should tell you that. We use the same 10 botanicals, the same recipe as we've used for the last 5 generations and 150 years, 150 plus years. And again, you can get all of these through on that tasting. So again, on the nose, if we give it a nice whiff, with your mouth open, your glasses off, you should get an instant hit of juniper coming in there. And there aren't many rules when it comes to making gin, but the number one rule is that it must be predominantly juniper flavored. And as I'm sure James and Jared would tell you, we get through a lot of juniper at our distilleries, and we really push it to the very front to make sure, because if it doesn't taste of juniper, ultimately it's not gin technically. So so we got bags of juniper on the nose there, and that gives it that piney, foresty flavor. And again, similar to Sipsmiths, you've got that burst of citrus coming through. You've got your lemon peels and your orange peels from Seville. Then similarly, you get that spice and that warming notes coming through. We use cassia bark, cinnamon, and nutmeg to kind of give it a bit more of a menthol spice in there as well. You get the sweetness coming through with the licorice. Licorice being, depends who you talk to, but sort of 7 times sweeter than natural sugar. And we use plenty of that in there to give it that really kind of sweet, rounded mouthfeel at the end. And then you've got the supporting cast of botanicals that bring through that dryness and that earthiness of your orris root and your angelica root in there as well. It gives it that nice, dry, earthy finish. As I said, absolutely textbook for what gin should be, and hopefully what gin will continue to be going forward. And if you're going to drink it, perfect for a gin and tonic, of course, but also perfect for a martini, as is preferred here. But that's a very, very quick, very rough overview of what we do here. We'd love to tell you more, and we can come on down and we'll show you around.
As somebody who has wandered down to the Hayman's distillery, it's a short walk around the corner from a random train station in South London. Nice and easy to find. Balham. I always get lost in South London. I live in the northwest, south of the river. I get very confused. But what I would say is the little sample bottles, they're called the perfect measure for a reason. They are the perfect measure. Originally, it was the perfect measure to share, which has now become the perfect measure to have 2 tasters of. But have a little taster, but you've still got enough in there to make yourself a G&T later on, or sort out a martini. So if you want to have a play around, you should have enough. But moving on to our next guest, we have James Chase. So,
we've switched around. Thank you so much, Billy. Because I've got Chris and Jared on the call, I really wanted to just do a quick scoot around the distillery for 2 minutes. I've always wanted to get Jared especially and Chris up here to see us, but we're quite a nouveau distiller as such, starting in 2008, 12 years ago. We're based in Herefordshire. Now, Herefordshire is really not known for making gin, but we've got the Brecon Beacons to our left that you can see here, and then over to the right, you've got the Malvern Hills, and around the fields We grow potatoes and apples aplenty in Herefordshire, and that's really how we're a little bit different than the fact that we don't use a grain base. So I'm a huge fan and hugely proud to be alongside Hayman from Sipsmith, who for a long time have really set the benchmark, and I'm really honoured to be in their company as gin makers. But the elegant gin that we're going to try first is actually made from cider apples. So I'm just going to quickly run through the distillation process, and then we're going to try a little bit. So this is an old hop building. We've been distilling here for 12 years. It looks like we've been here 100 years, but this is where we start fermentation. So we take those potatoes and apples that we source from Herefordshire, and we try to create a low wine or a cider in the case of the gin that you're going to try just now. So this is fermentation. It's a huge lot of work where we strip the alcohol into what we class as our base spirit. So we do everything from scratch, and then we take that base spirit and we redistill it to make gin. So gin has a huge pedigree in London, but what makes gin so interesting is there's been so many more craft distillers from all around the globe putting their each unique spin on it. And because we're farmers, me and my father William are passionate about farming. We love doing things a bit differently, and that's been very unique here at Chase. So we have our still set up here. We've got Fat Betty, where we take those low wines, be it our ciders or potato mash, and we strip them into our vodka. And then if we just come down the side, we've got our gin still Ginny, which still to this day does all of our work. So through Fat Betty, Maximus, and Ginny, we distill all of our gins, and we are technically a gin distillery now. 85% of our business is gin, but it all started off making vodka back in 2008, and today we're super proud to give people a bit more of an understanding about different bases and how they can affect tastes and flavours. And we've really designed our gins to make sure that the heart of that flavour, the essence of the field, is evoked in the end spirit. Whilst grain has a certain flavour profile, we championed some of the kind of historical farming capabilities here in Herefordshire, particularly the cider apples that you're going to try now. So let me grab a tasting glass. And then we're going to crack open the elegant gin that we're going to try first of all. So this is my father's favourite gin, William's Elegant Gin. I'd say it's a really unique gin. It's actually the first gin that we distilled here at Chase. It's based from a cider variety. We've got things in there like Dabonnet, Mary's Pick, really heritage cider varieties that we strip into what we call a vodka. And then we redistill with the 19 botanicals that make up the Elegant Gin. So I'd say probably slightly less juniper forward than certainly Sipsmith and Hayman's. But this gives you a bit more of a new world style of gin to try. So crack open the bottle and then pour a healthy glug in. And then first up, if you've got a nice tasting glass, just give it a whiz around the glass. In terms of gin production style, it's all made in our Carterhead style still, called Ginny, which you just saw earlier, where in a sense we're loading the belly with the spirit, and up above the Carterhead, we're suspending those botanicals, the Macedonian juniper, right the way through to things like hops and elderflowers that hopefully we're going to taste in the gin in a minute. And it's those botanicals that really kind of almost embody this distillery that at one stage used to be an old hop drying barn. It's come a long way since, but it's our first ever gin. Where does the Williams come from? Well, I mentioned Wales earlier. My father's mother's maiden name is Williams, and this is really our trophy gin, really well suited for cocktails and martinis. So you swill around the glass, and you see these lovely tears that coat the outside of the tasting glass. Main reason here is because it's quite a hefty gin at 48% ABV. So the alcohol content is rich. Why are we going up to that ABV? Well, the dosage of the botanicals, it's not particularly at the highest. So by going to slightly higher ABVs, we're able to lock in a lot more flavour. And then we can adjust that to water it down when you're stirring it down into a martini. So let's have a go on the smell. Straight away, I'm getting this lovely juniper that comes through, but balancing on from that, I get almost this elderflower meets. Have you ever walked down an apple orchard on a dewy morning? You get this kind of apple peel that comes through, almost like a tannin, but a sweet, lovely tannin. Finished with a slight delicate, not skunky, but almost hot characteristic that comes through right at the end. Let's all have a taste. Cheers, everybody. Synonymous with a lot of our spirits. It's a lovely mouthfeel all the way through. Like Jared said earlier, great spirits should be warm. They shouldn't burn. Williams Elegant 48 is a whopper at 48 ABV, but it's incredibly smooth. As I go through the gin, I get the lovely licorice that helps bring all of the botanicals together. And again, those apple peels, the licorice that really kind of ride through. And right at the end, I get those delicate hop notes that really come through. So for me, stirring this down in a sweet martini is fantastic. Try and get a great vermouth. A lot of bartenders will probably just hold up the vermouth to the sunlight and stir it down to make a lovely, delicate martini. But it also goes fantastically well in cocktails. And I had one the other day. It was a Ramos gin fizz with that apple slice to garnish it off. So guys, thank you so much for trying the Williams Elegant 48. And I look forward to trying the other spirits from the chaps. Cheers.
Cheers, James. Impromptu distillery tour and everything. So thank you very much.
Wow, quickest ever. Yeah.
But so if you have a distillery, you know. Yeah, so we start off with these three different styles of gin. You know, even within the two London Dries, very, very different style of gin there. The Chase again, something really quite different. And while the gin market over the past 10 years has really, really grown and exploded in popularity, and it's been this sort of key thing of looking at different flavors of gin and different styles of gin, the thing which we've sort of noticed a lot over sort of more recent years is there's been a push out from various different producers into making flavored gins of various different kinds. And there's loads of different approaches to that, from using interesting botanicals to creating liqueurs to adding things afterward. Loads of different ideas of how to do it. And each of these three distillers have come up with a very, very different way, with different bits of history and stuff in there. So what I'll do is, first things first, I want to jump to Jared and to Sanford to give us a little run through and tell us all about Sipsmith's gin that we have in our flavored gin pack.
The Sipsmith slow gin that you have in your pack. There we go. And when I hold this up, you'll also see, don't know if you can see, it's vintage dated on there. And we vintage date these because the harvest is going to be different every year, and the slows will imbue different flavors into here. But when we started out, it was a bit of an awkward moment for me with my accent, because as a historian of drink, I researched slow gin extensively, and then I went out, traveled around the country, going to any place where people said they made great slow gin, from Edinburgh to Bovey Castle down near Plymouth, just all over. And I didn't know how to say this, because slow gin is to Britain what limoncello is to Italy. Everyone makes it at home. Everyone is fiercely proud of it. Everyone trots it out for guests after a meal. The trouble for me back then was, well, limoncello is good. And I just could not get my head around the slow gin people were serving. I also have a background as a chef, and there was just something wrong in the flavors. And I found everyone's traditional recipe traced back to this recipe, printed in an English newspaper in 1881. You'll all know the recipe. It said, harvest after the first frost. It added, preferably under a full moon. Then prick each sloe, each of these tiny wild plums, with a thorn from the tree upon which it grows, or a silver pin. Full moon, silver pin, are they werewolves or something? I'm not sure. And then combine the gin, the sloes, and sugar, and shake every week until Christmas. And then a lot of recipes after that said, oh, and use cheap gin, it's just an ingredient, doesn't really matter. I have yet to see a Sunday roast recipe that says use cheap beef, it's just an ingredient, it doesn't matter. Believe me, the gin matters. And I looked at this recipe and every bit of it was wrong. So we came up with a radical new secret formula. Harvest when they're ripe. How do you tell when a sloe is ripe? You feel it. You just go out and pinch it. It feels like a ripe plum. It even gets a little yeast powder coating on it, so you know it's ripe. In fact, the sloes in my garden are ripe now. So sloes are running a bit early this year. I lived in London for a while. I had a great secret source of sloes there. In case you don't have access to sloes, I will give this away freely. eBay. Buy it now. Get sloes delivered. Then don't prick them with a pin at all. Put them in a freezer. Leave it there a couple of days. That ruptures the cell structure of the fruit like 1,000 pins. Then put it in a bottle with gin and absolutely no sugar. None. Because putting sugar in, and I asked what sugar did before I'd learned, and I was told, oh, helps the fermentation. Nothing ferments in gin. Gin, you put a lizard in there, 10 years from now, it's going to be a lizard. Yeah, it's a preservative, but it's also remarkable at extracting flavors. And if there isn't sugar already in the spirit, it's remarkable at extracting natural fruit sugars. So don't set up a saturation barrier. Allow the spirit to extract the natural sugars. And then people said, oh, the longer it's on the fruit, the better. And I tried some that had been on the fruit for 14 years. It's a bell curve, folks. It really is. 2 months, 3 months, 5 months. At about 6 months, it develops a new flavor. Like you found an old sponge under the kitchen sink and put that in. At 2 years, it develops another flavor. Like you headed out into the countryside in a Land Rover, ran over a mud puddle full of oak leaves a bit, and added a few drops of that. So now 2 to 5 months, I taste at 2 months. If it's ready, sweetened to taste. And now you get sloe gin that's sweetened exactly how you want it. But when I say, oh, and just use simple syrup or 2-to-1 sugared water if you're worried about adding too much water, then you can get that sweetness balance. But when I say to taste, what I'm looking for when I taste sloe gin is the 4 pillars of sloe: dark cherry, citrus, cinnamon, and marzipan. That is the base structure of sloe gin. You can go on our website, read our tasting notes for every vintage. They will all come up around that. You may find notes, big raspberry around that, or dark cherry and leather, or tangerine running, or chocolate. Bitter chocolate comes up occasionally. Beautiful flavor. But what do you do when you've got a radical secret formula? Well, we put it in the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian. I went on Alan Titchmarsh, I think it was 5.5 million viewers that day, and gave it away. Now I show up to people's homes and they say, oh, you've got to try my sloe gin. I ditched everything from before I got your formula. This was a selfish thing I did. It was so that I wouldn't have to try this stuff where they'd put the sugar in at the start and where they'd harvest it after the first frost instead of when they're ripe. So this is sloe gin as I like it. And there is one thing that I do in the distillery that you can't do so well at home. 60% ABV is the optimal alcohol strength for flavor extraction from fruit in maceration. So we don't cut our London Dry back to bottling strength when it goes on the sloes. We just bring it to 60%. You can get the same effect by using the Sipsmith VJOP at 57.7. You're just about there. So I know a lot of people now making their home sloe with this one. So there's sloe gin. I do some other flavors. An orange gin from the 1850s, though in truth, this is my first departure within Sipsmith from London Dry. I went back to Old Tom from 1812, which is when Old Tom first emerged, and to fine cordial gin from the 1790s. And I used notes from those traditions to create a sweeter balance here. But lemon and orange gin, those were all the rage in the 1850s, all the way up to 1900, disappeared till 1920, booming up into the 30s, and then in the 50s and 60s again, which is why I do those. Yes, I've got a pink gin here. Bottle of London Dry, 250 to 300 grams of raspberries into a Kilner jar. Leave it for 7 to 10 days. That's the optimal time. Strain it off, put it back in the bottle. It will hold that raspberry color and flavor up to 5 years. You can test different raspberry vintages this way. So have a bit of fun with that one. And cheers.
Cheers. And the thing I just want to ask about the wonders of sloe gin is that people have different ways of drinking it. What would you say for you, outside of just sticking it in a glass and pouring it into your face? What is the best way of drinking your sloe gin, would you reckon?
Tall glass of ice, a double measure of sloe, soda, a lime wedge, a bar spoon to give it a lift, or ice cream spoon, just give it a lift. You'll see the color merge through. That is one of the best summer drinks possible. For a more sophisticated one, a 4-ingredient Negroni, equal parts London Dry, Campari, sweet vermouth, and sloe gin. The sloe disappears in there and just brings out the best of all the other ingredients. So those are 2 spots. I dearly love sloe. Or in place of port.
Oh wow! Well, I've got a little bit of this one left. That's my post-tasting Negroni sorted out then. So that's
there you go.
There are rules. You have to have a post-tasting Negroni. They're the rules. So anyway, thank you very much, Jared. So moving on to you, Chris. Do you want to tell us all about Hayman's Gin Liqueur, which is the next we're going to be trying?
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, Hayman's Gin Liqueur. This one here, a bottle. If you're familiar with Hayman's, you may not have seen our gin liqueur as much. It's probably one of the more niche products today that we do. When Billy got in touch about us doing this and then asked for the gin liqueur, I was had to remember what I was talking about with gin liqueur. But it's a really interesting product. I think really relevant for this topic to talk about, as it's actually something that for Hayman's, the inception of it dates back to the 80s. Again, it was so the family gin. It's been made for a very long time. Christopher Hayman, who's still our master distiller and his 51st year in the gin industry today. So talking some 30 to 40 years ago, back in the 80s. They were looking, gin was a very tired industry. I don't know if anyone, I personally don't remember it myself back then, but I don't know if anyone else remembers what it was like back then. But it was a bit of a tired industry even back then. And Christopher had the idea of doing something a bit different with gin, and similar to as Jared sort of mentioned there. Everything we try to do is informed by the history of the industry and the spirits. And looking back, as he mentioned, there's been gin cordials, Old Tom gin, things like that. Gin has been sweetened in the past to create a different product. Back in the 1800s, the Old Toms, they were very much sweetened for different reasons, not just for flavor, but also just to make it palatable and drinkable. Because we're talking about gin that wasn't distilled in beautiful craft distilleries like you've been shown today. We're talking about bathtub gins and turpentine that was flavored with whatever was available on the distillery floor. So a bit of sugar in there went a long way to making something very drinkable. And there was this history of sweetened gins, and that's what Christopher had the idea of doing something then. Back in the 80s, like I say. There were obviously changes in the business and the landscape at the time, and that idea was shelved, and they could never quite come up with a name for what it would be. It wasn't until 2004, actually, when his son and my good friend and boss James Hayman took over, and they thought, let's have a look. This is 2004. Gin's still rattling along a little bit here, and they thought, let's do something a bit different and a bit more interesting. And they got that idea back off the shelf of the gin liqueur, and it is essentially quite a simple concept that we do. I don't know if you open your little liqueurs up and get it out and have a smell and a taste, or even, I don't know if you've got any information on the little bottles that you've given out, but our gin liqueur is 40% ABV. So again, when we talk about what is gin, it must be predominantly juniper flavored, and it must be over 37.5% ABV. I was only in the 90s, it dropped down to 37.5. It was previously 40 before then. So we always like to keep, if it's going to be a gin, we want to keep it above sort of 40 or above that. So our gin liqueur, a lot of people think liqueurs these days, they're typically in between your 20 to 30 range, some even lower than that as well. Not necessarily the case. It's a liqueur by definition of being 100 grams of sugar per litre in the mix there. So we are very close to that margin, to that tipping point of 100 grams. I think on the market these days, if we're looking at the wider market, the flavoured market, there's sort of nearer 200 plus grams in some other things out there that are in this gin bracket. But yeah, with our liqueur, it's got that little bit of sugar in there, or a fair amount of sugar in there, but it's still very much got juniper shining through at the heart of it. If you give it a nose and a taste, it's those same 10 botanicals in our London Dry. It's not the same botanical mix, but in there it's the same 10 botanicals with a considerable hit more of the orange in there as well. You tend to get that real kind of almost like marmalade on the nose with that sweetness and the orange in there. And as soon as you taste it, the first thing you feel, it's got a real texture to it. It's that thickness, it's that viscosity. And that's the sugar in there. It coats the mouth. Sugar is, after all, a carrier of flavour. Alcohol and sugar are two of the best carriers of flavour. And that's what we have. And this is why this is bursting with flavours. If you like classic gin, if you like our London Dry, the liqueur itself, it's like that, just dialed up to 100 basically. And if you've got a sweet tooth, then it definitely ticks that box as well. But as I say, it was a product back in 2004 that was just something to be a slight different extension, just to show things that you could do with gin. Because back then we didn't have, sparkly pink gin and all these and the crazy concoctions that we see these days. It was very much you had your London Dries, and that was about it. James, I was speaking to him just this morning, in fact, and was saying it's always been a fairly niche product, the gin liqueur, but even when it first came out, the first people that were selling it, there was two customers that had it. It was Harrods and, of course, Whisky Exchange. You guys were the first people back when it was called the 1820 gin liqueur. He told me it was the first time he met you guys there, went to your warehouse on the outskirts of London, and James and Christopher Hayman looked at each other and thought, we're never coming out of this alive. But they met you and said it's like Aladdin's cave down there, isn't it? You've got everything, and it was phenomenal, and struck up a good partnership, I think, and they're still alive today.
I hasten to add that wasn't me. That's my. And if he's watching this, you know why I'm saying that. Anyway, the thing I like about this gin liqueur though is that it is unlike many of the sort of the flavored gins and which you sort of market, which are great things themselves. They're gin based. They taste other things. This is gin. This is a gin, which is a liqueur. It's not the other way around. It's focusing on the gin first rather than the extra flavors, which is, as I say, a very, very different approach to what a lot of the folks are doing these days. Exactly.
It's one of the things we're often asked is what flavour is your gin, especially nowadays by a more younger generation of gin drinkers. It's what flavour is your gin, and it always sounds ridiculous, but it's gin flavoured. It's and that is what it is. It should be. If it says gin on the bottle, it should taste like gin in the glass. And the gin liqueur, as I say, was an early way of extending that into something a little bit different. But the market has moved. There is this flavoured, there is this colour gin, the quest for this. We looked into that as well. And we very much said, what are these flavoured gins that don't necessarily have juniper at the heart of them. And there's the historical style of a drink called a cup, which is Pim's cup being the most well known probably by most people. So if we're talking about, if you're watching this because you're into that flavored category more, whereas this is gin but to a sweetened palate and with a bit more of an orange tint to it. We do have another product, the Peach and Rose Cup, which has been a phenomenal summer product. Again, 25% ABV, so it's definitely not a gin. It's got a gin base in there, but looking at flavors and things like that, because that's definitely where this market is going. It's got your peach flavors. We've got peach distillate, rose distillate, cucumber, mint, all those sorts of things in there. But for us, it overtakes juniper. Therefore, we wouldn't call it a gin. That's why we've sectioned it off to its own section of a cup. But if you're into the sweeter flavors, then the gin liqueur, for example, does tick those boxes as well.
Excellent. I'm trying to work out what, again, because it's a liqueur, and so traditionally a nice chilled glass after dinner or something like that, aperitif, whatever. But what do you do with the gin liqueur as a
way to drink? Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, the most favored way to enjoy it is straight. If you keep it in the freezer, bring it out. Just imagine you've got the nice frosty bottle, pour it nice and viscous into a little sipping glass, sip it with a wedge of orange, wedge of grapefruit in there as well. That sort of softer citrus just really highlights those flavors. And again, with a nice wedge of citrus, you can cut through some of that sweetness and that viscosity. Or the other alternative that I'm actually sipping, well, is nearly gone now, is because you've got the sweetness in there, what you can do is you just mix it with soda. So as you would with a gin and tonic, but you use a soda in there. And then I've got lemon in there, but sometimes with some, in the summertime, with some berries, some strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, and things like that, you get this beautiful kind of sweet, dry, fruity mix going on in there. And that works really well. It is very popular in the States as well. A lot of the bartenders out there in America, they enjoy it, mainly because I think there's a sweeter tooth in America. But when you're making cocktails, the majority of gin cocktails, if you go with a basic sour mix, a sort of gin, sugar, lemon, and then something on top of that. And with the gin liqueur, you're kind of ticking the box of your gin and your sugar in there already. So, you know, if you want to make a Bramble or a Tom Collins or something like that, you just need the lemon and then the creme de mure or the soda to top it up as well. So it's kind of a shortcut into cocktail making, if you wanted to look at it that way. But yeah, but it was the other interesting part about the story of the liqueur is that as I mentioned, I think Jared mentioned earlier, that sweetened gin, people say, well, is that not Old Tom gin? As we mentioned, Old Tom kind of spawned as being this slightly sweeter gin that was sold in the back alleys of London. And this is, so Hayman's, one of the other gins that we're very famous for is our Old Tom gin. Christopher Hayman brought that style back in the early 2000s. And it was born off of the success of the gin liqueur and people saying, well, if this is gin liqueur, what's Old Tom? And Old Tom is basically a little bit of sugar, not your 100 grams per litre, but a little bit in there. And again, that's a whole nother style, which I could do a good 3-4 hour talk on if we want. I don't think anyone wants to hear that now, but maybe
that one. Don't worry. Yeah, we'll come back and do that one. So, but yeah, you say that, yeah, it's a shortcut to cocktails. So, you know, because of course, yeah, after my post tasting Negroni, I need to have a post tasting Bramble because there are rules, and so I see how my evening's going to go. It's going to go quite well, it seems.
We're going to have quite the Zoom lock-in after this.
We'll see what we can do. Thanks a lot, Chris. So, you know,
thank you.
We've gone from, you know, very traditional style to a very, very, you know, an old-fashioned recipe, sort of old-fashioned style of gin liqueur, and now onto something a little bit more modern from James. So we're going to move on to the Chaser Pink Grapefruit and Pomelo Gin. So, James, tell us about this.
Oh, great. So the Nouveau Distiller is back. We set up Chase really from like a trip to America. We were on another venture with Dad. And when we were out there, we were, like you do on trips, you go to bars and you enjoy a few drinks. And when we were out there in 2006, 2007, we were sat in these bars in New York, Manhattan, and we started to try these spirits that were less about celebrity and bottle and more about taste and flavor. Needless to say, we had a great time. We tasted a lot of things, and it was the start of the craft spirit revolution back in America. We got the bug and we came back over here, and we were determined to help the UK rediscover their love for taste and flavor in the spirits industry. And not to say that that wasn't there already, but we wanted to inject more of our love of finding that. And then that we started this distillery in 2008, and since then we've wanted to experiment. We've wanted to explore new flavors while still understanding the past, which is so important. Bear in mind, over the last 2 years, over 600 gin brands have entered the market. There's a gin for every hour of the day, and as I'm sure that Chris and Jared will agree, that I think there's a lot of rules that particularly can be bent a little bit in the way that gin should be made and how it should be made. But here at Chase, we love to stick to tradition, but we love to push the boundaries further. And looking at gin in particular, so long as juniper is at the heart of everything that you do, and it's quite rightly, above that alcohol threshold, then I think it's great to explore. And the growth in flavored gins has really excited consumers. And I think partly for pink gin's success is almost its colour and its vibrosity. If you look at England, this is meant to be summer, and it's very cloudy and quite miserable. And flavoured gins give a little bit of holiday and excitement to that. And you're going to taste in a minute a bit about pink grapefruit and pomelo, and how it lifts the mood and how it transports you almost to the Mediterranean, to a summer holiday, while sitting back in Blighty with the rain. But if you ever get a chance, crush some juniper up at home and give it a smell. And that smell really should be at the heartbeat of any gin. And if it's not there, quite rightly so, it shouldn't really be gin. But because there's no mad professor looking over the gin category, then it's anyone's game. And I think we've got to be really careful as guardians of the gin brands, and Hayman's and Sipsmith do a fantastic job of that, of keeping the tradition alive and making sure that you guys at home and through great stewards like the Whisky Exchange keep gin at the heartbeat. So Chase love to experiment. We've done loads of different flavors, and we're actually quite proud that some of those flavors haven't worked as well. I remember bartenders coming around the farm once and saying we had too many nettles on the farm, so we made a nettle vodka, and don't ask me how that went. We've done great successes. We made a horseradish vodka for the Savoy when it opened recently. And we love to experiment. We're farmers. We love playing with things. And albeit the vodka was at the heart of our story, our Burberry trench coat, and the reason why we started, we love to experiment. You tried earlier Dad's favourite gin. It's his favourite gin. He definitely doesn't give it to the in-laws. But our dry gin is our GB gin, based off the potato vodka. And this is really the heartbeat. It's technically our London dry, albeit we're not in London. But it's made from that potato spirit. So you get a much more of a creamy viscosity to the spirit. But all of our flavoured gins are based off this, with 10 botanicals in a Carter head style still, and that all important one shot. Juniper is at the heartbeat, but we've got in things in here like cinnamon, and ginger, albeit with your licorice and bitter almonds that ride it right through, and some lemon kibbles as well. But this GB gin is the heartbeat of our brand, and it's the base of all of our flavoured gins. So, you're all quite thirsty at home, but I just wanted to quickly explain that our flavoured gins are proper distillates. They're not simply ingredients that have been added together or like, quite rightly, flavour houses. We're distillers, and we love distilling, and it's to our peril sometimes, but we love imparting that flavour and getting the flavour into the spirit. Flavoured gins probably have been around for quite a while. I'm sure a lot of you guys out there are very familiar with Hendrix, who almost set the way with, I remember consumers or members of the public going to the bar and not quite remembering what gin they wanted, but cucumber was top of mind, and cucumber and rose pepper really were at the heartbeat of Hendrix gin, which obviously had juniper still at the heartbeat. So flavoured gins really aren't a new thing. And if you look even back a bit further, there's a lovely gin called Martin Miller's that put that cucumber really at the heart of their story too. So flavoured gins are growing. Unfortunately, there's a few wacky gin flavours out there that probably skew the record a little bit, but all of our flavours are redistilled in ginny, and in this case, we're redistilling our GB gin with pink grapefruit and pomelo in our gin still. But you get a lovely pink hue on the glass that you see. If you start to pour in your glass, don't worry, I'm going to jump to my tasting in a minute. If you hold it up to the light, you get this lovely pink hue that comes in. And that's imparted in the marmalizer. Often Dad goes away on these crazy trips and he brings back these wacky inventions, and the marmalizer was one of them. A lot of you might be familiar with our Marmalade Vodka. Well, here our flavour is either macerated or imparted. It's technically a pressure cooker, albeit I can't give you the full facts of how it's made, but once we've run the distillate through the gin still, we then rerun it through the marmalizer to create the pink grapefruit and pomelo gin. So I hope you guys are all ready to taste. I am. It's been a long day. So last up, we've got the pink grapefruit and pomelo. Got my lovely junipers there. Whilst we are farmers, we love making our own base spirit. We love a good holiday. We love to travel the world, or we used to love traveling the world, and I'm sure that Jared and Chris can agree. Launching and building the distilleries has enabled us as a family to travel all around the world, which has been so magical. And it's on these trips that we bring back flavors, recommendations and serves. And we love chatting with chefs, and we love bringing ingredients back and working with the distillers. So albeit we're very British in the heartbeat of the potatoes and apples that we use as our base spirit, we're very worldly and global in terms of the exotic botanicals and flavors that we bring back to Herefordshire. So we have great relationships with our juniper and botanical suppliers. We've been great supporters of them for over 12 years now. But the pink grapefruit and pomelo are very unique citruses. And it was actually on one occasion that we were halfway around the world that we actually bumped into a famous fragrancer, Joe Malone, and one drink led to the other. And we were really interested in fragrances and how they can really transport spirits to the next level. And what you're going to taste and smell in a minute is this, albeit pink grapefruit in the heartbeat, but pomelo that lifts the mood and that really fills the room with a lovely floral smell. So into our glass is the pink grapefruit and pomelo gin. And straight away, I get this almost bonanza of pink grapefruit that comes through, and a zippy, limey element that lifts the mood straight away. And here we're going to go and taste. Cheers, everybody, and lovely to meet you all virtually. Thank you. Straight away, I've got the juniper coming to say hello, but this limey, pink, fleshy grapefruit comes as an amazing surprise. And the slight tail off that leaves me wanting more. It's a delicious gin. There's absolutely no sugar added into it as well. And that's very unique in terms of the pink gin category. But it's absolutely delicious. How do you drink it? I hear you asking out there. Well, it's lovely drenched in tonic water. Mediterranean by Fever-Tree is fantastic. Loads of ice in the glass, and as Jared says, lift it through the glass is absolutely lovely. But if you're feeling a bit frivolous, a riff on the tequila Paloma is lovely. So in a cocktail shaker, add in the pink grapefruit and pomelo gin, some fresh lime juice, a bit of simple syrup, 2 to 1, not too much. Add in a bit of fresh pressed pink grapefruit juice, give it a really good shake, and then strain it into a rocks glass or however fancy you're feeling. And that's a lovely gin drink for it to shine through. You get the juniper, you get the gin botanicals really shining through the gin, but pink grapefruit is a perfect complement. And I really do think it's a lovely botanical that works well with gin on that expression. And hopefully I've done pink gin a bit of a service. I know historically, lot of sailors gone by with Angostura and water, but I think this is a pink gin for the 21st century, and it really does lift the mood. And I'm smiling quite a lot, but I've had such a lovely time tonight. So thank you so much, Billy, and guys at home. I hope you loved enjoying the pink grapefruit pomelo gin and seeing around our distillery here in Herefordshire. Cheers.
Cheers, James. Thank you very much. So, again, it's one of these things that, there's so many gins out there at the moment on the market that, different colours and things like that. And I don't think you can just about see that little pink tinge to it there. It's not like a massively pink gin. It's just got, that's not even my hand or my face. My face is significantly grayer than that. That is the pink of the gin. It's light, it's delicate, and as you say, as somebody who's not meant to be eating grapefruit anymore, I'm a big fan of it, and this just has this incredible burst of, it's like almost like those little grapefruit sweets.
And bartenders have really got behind it as well. The grapefruit is now synonymous to a bartender throughout the world, and using a fleshy pink grapefruit in a gin and tonic has been lovely. But we love trialing things, and I think nothing ventured, nothing gained, and for us it's all about experimenting, all about trying new things and tasting expressions, and ultimately getting the bartender to use something that they really can't recreate behind their own bar. And I remember launching this in Selfridges and then coming into Whisky Exchange, but it was amazing how the response of it straight away, and we very much gauge the success of our spirits with the likes of Whisky Exchange. So it's fantastic to see.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Now, as you say, we've had three very, very distinctive gins just from around the country, and then also three very, very different takes on this whole new flavoured gin, which is actually, as we've noticed, not actually all that new at all, really. But there's loads more gins out there, and the gin market's always growing. So it's one of these places where, if you want to explore new flavours, there's definitely something out there. And as you say, this is just three distillers. There's loads more, but of course, these are the three best distillers. So. Anyway, well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me. Has anybody got anything else to say before we sort of sign off? You're all sitting there quietly. If so, give us a wave, say hello. Oh no, you're all sitting quiet. Oh no, Jared's leaning in to hit his button. Oh, there he is.
Oh, and then just then a bit of a leg cramp. Oh, there we go.
If you will put your screen 4.5 miles away from you, this is what happens.
Oh, it's been a really wonderful session with you, James and Chris, and you, Billy. It's been an enjoyable sipping session, and I look forward to doing another one of these with all of you guys.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming along, and thank you, Sanford, for sitting quietly in the background and supervising.
Yes,
There's not much
Sanford.
I can add. I don't have much information that Jared doesn't already know.
Thank you for keeping him in line anyway.
But thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much, Chris, as well, for giving us a little bit of an insight, well, actually, a little show round of the distillery.
Yeah, thank you very much. So there's lots more distillery to see here. I'm in the lab now, but yeah, do come see us when the world clears up and we can socially distance, of course.
Soon, definitely soon. That's why I'm recommending. Excellent. And thank you very much, James.
Oh, what an honour. Sipsmith and Hayman's absolute rock stars. And Whisky Exchange.
yeah, we're all right. We just sell this.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. And thank you very much for everybody who's watching over on Facebook and the guys who join us in the Zoom room. Thank you from folks in general for joining in. So I'm as somebody who has not been exposed to the wonders of flavoured gin quite so much as I thought I would, I'm slightly taken aback by the pink grapefruit and pomelo. It's not entirely what I was expecting. So a bit of a smack to the face, that one. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us. We are continuing to do our virtual tastings every week, every Thursday. We have another one. But we're having a little bit of a rest after next week. Next week is my colleague Dawn Davis, Master of Wine, telling you all about how to pair wine and food together. But the week after that, we have a week-long virtual whiskey show. So if you want to come and join in, we've got more than 100 different tastings going up. The tasting sets are already on sale over on the whiskyexchange.com. But through the whole week, we've got more than 100 talks and tastings, over 100 of which are pretty much dead on 100. our actual tasting packs, which will be available over the coming weeks. So there's loads of things to taste, loads of things to listen to, loads of people to meet and just generally enjoy the wonderful world of whiskey, even though we can't sit in the gigantic shed together and talk about it. But again, thank you for joining me. And so for you on Facebook, I will say goodbye now.